All right. I was waiting for time. We got through with early worship a little bit earlier than usual because we were trying to get our timing down for 11 o'clock when we're going to have confirmation. So this is a very special Sunday for a lot of people. The way we do confirmation here is really wonderful. And I don't say that because I do it. We have other people who do it and make it happen. Debbie Peterson and the team that work with her, laity and clergy. All the confirmands choose a friend in faith, some adult they really admire, whom they think has a meaningful faith, whom they want to emulate that person. We have 26 in the class this year. It's a little smaller than usual. The sixth grade class is not quite as big as it has been running, but 26 really wonderful young women and men. And one thing that excites me is that they are encouraged to invite family and close friends to have lunch with them afterward, to celebrate this wonderful day when they took the next big step in their faith journey. And these 26 have 225 people coming to lunch with them. So is that not great support? Each one of them averages 8 people they've got who are coming to support them today, who are staying to have lunch with them as well. So that's very, very significant, and we're looking forward to that with great anticipation. Let's pray before we get underway. God, this book of yours is the most important in the world to us, because this book is about you. It's about how willing you've been through the centuries to reveal yourself to us, to help us know more about you. And we know we're encouraged on every page to ask, what is God doing here? What is God doing in this situation? So we pray you will help us today find those places where you are at work in the world and what you are doing, so that we may join you in what you are doing to make your world what you want it to be. We offer our prayers in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Quick review, and it will be quick, but I don't want anyone to get behind if they're just starting with us. We're going through the greatest passages in the Bible as I know them. We're going to skip chapters from time to time that I think are not so important. We're going to hit highlights as we move through the Bible. These first 5 scrolls are the most important in Judaism. First 5 are the most important, called by Jews Torah, which means teachings or instructions. Later, when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek after the time of Alexander the Great, that translation was called the Septuagint. In scholarly readings, you'll often see that abbreviated as LXX, 70 in Roman numerals, because 70 of Israel's greatest scholars translated the Septuagint, and scholars just use this as shorthand. But you'll see that in any number of books in our library that are serious commentaries on the Torah. Pentateuch is what the Torah came to be known after Septuagint, because that's a Greek word. Penta we know as 5, and so rather than meaning teachings or instructions, it simply means the 5 scrolls, those 5 most important ones. I told you and went through a fairly lengthy explanation why we and the best Jewish scholars also believe the Torah was produced by 4 different groups. We don't know individual names, but we can find strands in these 5 scrolls that have things in common, language and names of places and so on, so that one's called the J source. J because in Hebrew, as in German, a J has a Y sound. So Yahweh is the name given to Moses at the burning bush, the shortened form of that. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh was the name, I am who I am, shortened to YHWH. And in a number of commentaries on the Torah, they will simply abbreviate that, YHWH, the name given at the burning bush. But J, the Yahvist, it's called by scholars, the Yahvist. E, passages in the Torah where God is called by the older name that the Hebrews knew, El or Elohim, and where the holy mountain is not called Sinai but Horeb, and so on. In J passages, it's very primitive. God just walks up and talks to people. E came along later, and scholars say, by this time people are saying, no, did God really just walk up and speak to you? Well, no, I had a vision, I had a dream. When Oral Roberts was under such intense pressure when we arrived in the city in 1980 about the city of faith, and that he saw Jesus looming over, he got a lot of flack about that, and I know how he said it. But once in a conversation with me, he said, in my heart I saw. And that's a very different thing. So the Elohist, you see, says, no visions and dreams. That's the way God speaks to us. The Deuteronomist produced not only the book, the scroll of Deuteronomy, but continued working in other parts of the Hebrew Scriptures, First and Second Chronicles in particular, but other portions. We'll talk about those later. The priests, after there was an organized temple in Jerusalem in the time of King David and King Solomon, of course, got it finally built, an educated priesthood, then the priests began to deal with these ancient strands of writing, and did some of their most significant work. The priest who survived in Babylon in the 6th century, beginning in 587, 586, but continuing for the next 50 years before they were liberated by the Persians and allowed to go home. We know that many chose not to go home. After 50 years, they were established in Babylon. Some even moved farther east into Persia. And if you were to talk to our two rabbis here in Tulsa, they will tell you that they have multiple books called Talmud, and much of that Talmud, commentary on Jewish scriptures, written in Babylon. And it's called the Babylonian Talmud, written by priests. But we have evidences of that in the Torah as well. Okay, simply to say, Moses didn't write the first 5 books. J, E, D, and P produced the first 5 books. There will be times when I may point out, now this is a J writer, this is an E writer. But by and large, just for your underlying background, we know the Jews were not a written people for about 800 years. From the time of Abraham and Sarah all the way to King David, we have nothing in any library in the world that shows the Jews to have known how to read and write before the time of King David. None. So they were an oral people who told their stories around campfires for hundreds of years, and finally those stories then were put down after they had the temple in Jerusalem and knew better how to read and write. Okay. Genesis chapter 6 today. If you'd open your Bibles, that's where I want us to begin. Chapter 6, verse 5. Okay, I've told you that the Torah begins the history of the Jewish people and their relationship with God, with Abraham and Sarah. Everything before Abraham and Sarah is prehistory. Meaning, the Jews' attempt to describe why the world was what it was when Abraham and Sarah came along. Trying to describe how the world came to be that Abraham and Sarah experienced when they lived. Roughly 1800, before the Common Era. And remember, they lived in what would become the Great Babylonian Empire. But before it was the Great Babylonian Empire, modern-day Iraq, they lived in Ur, in the Chaldean mountains, near the Tigris-Euphrates rivers. Okay, that's where they live. So Jews and Arabs are definitely cousins. Muslims say they're half-brothers, almost, if you would, to Jews. That they had Abraham as a father through the slave girl Hagar and her child Ishmael, and that the Jews came from Sarah and her son Isaac. So Isaac and Ishmael were half brothers, same father, different mothers, and they claimed they were half brothers to the Jews. Surely do hate Jews now, but Jews and Muslims, Arabs, most of whom are Muslims, cousins, half-brothers and sisters through all these centuries. So all these people are very closely related, and I can tell you when you go to Israel, you will be I think you'll find it impossible to know when you're talking to a Jew and when you're talking to an Arab. I can't tell. And later a guide will say to me, that was a nice, Arab store. And I say, it was? Well, yeah, couldn't you tell? No, I couldn't tell. That was a nice, Jewish store. Really? Yes, that was, and I couldn't tell, one store owner from the other. The guides can tell, but they can't always tell. Because people get on buses with bombs strapped around their waist they didn't know were Arabs and didn't know that they were a danger and so on. All right. The point is they're very closely related, and the Jews start their history with Abraham and Sarah. So we're still dealing today with prehistory. The attempt of Jewish storytellers through hundreds of years trying to explain how the world got into the situation it was in when Abraham and Sarah came along. Chapter 6, verse 5. The Lord. Now what I want you to note here is that the Lord translates this name, remember, in good translations like the New Revised Standard Version. They're very consistent in their translation. Lord translates this name. God translates this name. So what I want you to note is that here we're dealing with prehistory, but the name being used, they didn't even know till the time of Moses. You understand? They're describing something that happened more than 600 years before Moses, but using a name for God that wasn't known until Moses' time. Okay? So not written down until after Moses, but a story that predated Moses, predated Abraham and Sarah. Okay? All right, so it translates the name, the I am who I am, saw that the wickedness of humankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry He had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved Him to His heart. So the Lord said, Lord here again translate, I am who I am. So the I am who I am said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created. People, together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the I am who I am. Okay, let's stop just a second. Let's go back, just a quick review. 2 creation stories. Genesis 2, the older, more primitive one. Genesis 1, written at least 400 years after Genesis 2. More sophisticated. The old one, God scoops up the dew-moistened earth one morning, flops it on a wheel, begins to spin around. He creates a little man and breathes on him. The ruach of God, and the little man jumps down off the wheel, and God makes other things, and the little man gets to name them. I'll make something God said you name them. Okay. Little man was still sort of happy and unhappy and listless, and so God caused a deep sleep on him, took a rib, made a woman. Adam woke up and said, now this is more like it. That's the older story, more primitive. In the more recent one, written by the priest, Genesis 1, in Babylon, in the 6th century, is the Babylonian God bigger than the Israelites' God? And these priests wrote, in the beginning, and they used the older name for God. In the beginning, El created the heavens and the earth, not Marduk. El did it. There was darkness, there was chaos, God spoke, there was light, there was order, and so on. All right. After Genesis 2, the more primitive creation story, you have how those first humans started behaving. Talking snake, who told them God couldn't be trusted. God has lied to you about the tree of life. That's what he says. God lied to you. When Dr. Brandon Scott was here for our Barton Clinton Gordy series, he said the best translation of the word we usually translate the Satan is the liar. The liar. The one who tries to keep you from trusting. Who tries to make you believe you can trust no one or nothing. Certainly not God. Can't trust God. The serpent wants you to believe. The talking snake. The Satan. So the liar. And they first decide they can't trust God, so they eat forbidden fruit. And on the next page, one of their sons murders the other of their sons. Cain murders Abel. This ancient storyteller and those who followed along in that train telling the stories are simply aware that there is much evil in the world. Much evil in the world that people aren't trusting God, aren't doing things God's way, and so things have gotten really, really bad. Dr. Beverly Gavinta, one of our Barton Clinton Gordy presenters, I've been reading a lot of her work the last few weeks because I told you biblical scholars are very narrowly focused. One of Richard's classmates at Cornell College, Dr. Victor Furnish, is brilliant and taught at Perkins School of Theology for more than 40 years. But his greatest contribution came with Paul's second letter to the church at Corinth. He will be remembered for generations to come for his commentary on Paul's second letter to the church at Corinth. That's how narrowly focused they can be. Okay, so Beverly Gavinta, classmate of Bill Tankersley at Union Theological Seminary in New York, then went on and got a PhD and ended up being awarded a prestigious chair at Princeton. Dr. Gavinta says, in her commentaries, that there are so many churches now who do not want to admit how evil human beings are. And the number of these feel-good churches, the ones that let you eat donuts in the sanctuary and bring your Starbucks in, what do you want? That's what we'll be. What do you want? That's what we'll be. One of these fastest-growing churches out in Phoenix, I heard their pastor speak a few years ago, and he's talking about how people didn't want to waste an hour at church, so their services went to 50 minutes, and then 45 minutes, and then 40 minutes. And I said, when do you have time to baptize? Oh, we don't baptize. When do you have time for Holy Communion? Oh, we don't do communion. People don't have time for that. Won't take time for that. Beverly Gavinta says that as she visits churches, as she's asked to speak in various churches, she notices how few use a prayer of confession nowadays. Because people don't want to confess their sins. They don't want to think of themselves as being unfaithful, as having been unloving, as having been unwilling to put themselves out for the well-being of another. And in this passage I was reading in her book last week, she was saying, we mainline Christian clergy need to say to people, there is evil in the world. Now just stop and think about it. We've just celebrated the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall in Berlin. Did you watch that the other night? Did you see the big dominoes? I thought that was a clever way to do it. They set up all these dominoes, head tall, right along the path of the old wall. And as a part of the ceremony, somebody pushed one, and all the way through Berlin, this wall kept falling down. They were standing out there under umbrellas at the Brandenburg Gate. And we saw it when the wall was still up, and we've been back 3 times since the wall's come down. It's really, really amazing. But we hoped, did we not, that if the Soviet Union was falling apart, we would be in a whole new generation of peace. A generation of peace. How long did it take for us to realize it wasn't going to happen? If one evil power is weakened, other evil powers rise to take their place. Evil. the attempt to blow up the World Trade Center. Then the second time, a very successful attempt to destroy the World Trade Centers with airplanes and so on. And we were made aware that there were no walls high enough to protect Americans. No oceans today wide enough to protect Americans. We can be hit. We have been hit. We will be hit again. And we have to be constantly vigilant and so on. Okay? Evil. Walk across school campuses. Big kids still punch little kids. Big kids still mistreat little kids. Big kids still bully little kids. There's evil in the world, self-serving in the world. So this ancient storyteller knows about that. Some of these tribal groups of his time run around and hit somebody in the head with a rock and kill them. They fight over a watering hole. They fight over green grass. They fight over whose sheep that was, whose old ram that was that wandered from one herd to another. And they fight. They kill each other. Well, he says, there must have come a time when God was just up to here with human beings, so unhappy that people were not trusting Him and were not doing what He told them to do, how they were supposed to get along. God was sorry. He had made human beings. So He decided on a plan to get rid of them. And that plan to just wash them all away was a big flood. Big flood. Now, let me remind you, if you were at church last Sunday, you heard me say this in the sermon, and that is that we know today of at least 18 different stories about that big flood in the Middle East. 17 and the Jewish version of the story. 18. There may have been others. We have 18 in great libraries of the world. One tribal group after the other had a story about this big flood, which means what? There was a big flood one time. They thought it covered the whole earth. It didn't cover the whole earth. If you've ever been in a flood, it may look like it covers the whole earth. No, it just covers the part where you were. Okay. So they're trying to make sense of a big flood. And scholars ever since have been trying to figure out where that it could have occurred. Probably not in what we know today as modern-day Israel. It's probably too hilly. Scholars are convinced it probably was in that Mesopotamian area, Mezzo, in the middle of two rivers, Tigris, Euphrates, unusual heavy rains, two rivers flooding at the same time, overrunning everything. Okay. Perhaps that's where it occurred. Out of the Middle East came all these stories about a great flood. What we have is the Hebrews' understanding of that great flood. The sense they made of that flood in the generations that followed. Hundreds of years of telling that story around the campfire. And what did they make of the great flood? Okay, let's go on. Verse 9... Verse 10, guess what? Scholars say, written by the priests. More of those connectors. In Babylon, their young people aren't always buying these old stories told around campfires. They're listening to the Babylonians' explanation of things because the Babylonians have been the winners. The northern tribes, 150 years before, had bought what they were being told by the Assyrians. They just melded into the Assyrian culture. They ceased to exist as a separate people. The priests are frightened to death that their generation will just decide to become Babylonians, cease to exist as a separate people. And so they're trying desperately to make their teachings, their instructions, believable to their young people. And so they build connectors between all the stories. Begats. Scholars are sure the priest added those. They didn't mean any harm. They were trying to make it all add up. And their attempts to make it all hang together and all these stories be connected caused old Bishop Ussher several hundred years ago to add them all up and conclude that the earth had to have been created on a wet October afternoon about 6,000 years ago. And I still get letters, emails, telephone calls from people who watch me on television who want me to know the earth is only 6,000 years old. Every time I say something different, I get a letter or two or a half dozen telling me, no, add them all up, add them all up. You don't get billions of years, you get 6,000. That's all. Okay, all I want you to know is here, 9 and 10, these are connectors provided by the priest. Skip those. Go to verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight. The earth was filled with violence. And God, notice here in verse 11, verse 12, we've changed names. You notice? In verse 5, the Lord. Verse 6, the Lord. Verse 7, the Lord. Verse 11, God. J and E scrunched up together. J and E scrunched up together. Remember, the tribes live separately. 10 against 2. We'll come to this later, but 10 favored sons of Jacob, 10 not favored, 2 favored. 10 born to not favored wife and 2 handmaids. 3 different mothers produced those 10. 1 favored wife, Rachel, had 2 little boys. Joseph and Benjamin died giving birth to Benjamin, was buried at a little nowhere place called Bethlehem, the house of bread. Buried at Bethlehem would become very significant. Okay. King David, came to the power in the year 1000, was told by older, wiser advisors, David, you've got the right stuff to bring these 12 tribes together. If you would build a new capital city that's not north or south, but right on the border. He went to the Jebusites, got Mount Zion, started a new city, Yerushalayim, the city of peace. Everybody come. Everybody did. And his son Solomon got the temple built where he could have school and teach people to read and write. Stories from the south, stories from the north, combined, written down. That's what scholars believe happened. J-source, E-source. Perfectly. You can see it in good translations. Even if you can't read Hebrew, you can see these good translators are trying to give you a clue here. Lord, 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 God, God, God. 2 different words. Okay. So the first one, J, has said, human beings are terrible, absolutely terrible. God's sorry He made them. Then verse 11, after the little connectors the priest put in there, look at verse 11, it says it all over again. Because the priests in Jerusalem, trying to make peace between north and south, didn't choose the J story or the E story, they just bumped them up together. So you have the beginnings of the story is told by J, and then the beginning of the story is told by E. They're saying the same thing. It seems to be repeating itself, but it's because you have 2 accounts of what happened there, but they're very, very similar. Okay, verse 12, God, that older name, El, saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I've determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. People, I'm going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark. Cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you're to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Now remember, a cubit was the distance from an elbow to the longest finger. Okay, the middle one. Okay, elbow to the finger, about 18 inches. I mean, ancient folks had to measure some way. That was fairly accurate. A cubit, about 18 inches. This is how you're to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, 450 feet. Its width, 50 cubits, 75 feet. Its height, 30 cubits, about 45 feet. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, 18 inches or so. Put the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I'm going to bring a flood of waters on the earth to destroy from under heaven. Remember, heaven was whatever they were imagining held back the waters. Sometimes they thought of a great tent, a canopy, sometimes an upside-down bowl. That was all they could think of. God must have used one of those to hold back all the waters. So, to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the Ruach of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark. I just want you to notice here, I've underlined it so it'd make it easy, how many times this storyteller uses the same word. The ark, the ark, the ark, the ark, the ark. 5 times here. The e-writer has used this term. Now, after the Noah stories, we will not see that Hebrew word again until we come to the book of Exodus. And where do you think we see it in the book of Exodus? Moses' mother made an ark and put her baby boy into it. She sealed it inside and out with pitch. Same word as in this story. So as in Noah's time, when all of the hope of humankind, and of course forerunners of Israelites as well, are riding in this little boat, all the future of the Israelites is floating down the Nile with Moses in the ark. A baby in an ark. Well, just a sidelight, these old storytellers were very good, very capable. And so here you have this word repeated again and again and again. And after Noah lands, it's not used again until the time of Moses. Very significant time. Okay, so you and your family, you can go into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come into you to keep them alive. How many? 2. E after J. E is later, by about 50 years or so, scholars think. A little more sophisticated. J says God just walks up and talks to folks. E says, no, God doesn't really just walk up and talk to folks and hear with your ears, in your visions, in your heart, in your dreams. All right? Just to sort of keep things separated here. This is E. 2 of every kind, male and female. Take with you every kind of food that's eaten, store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. So Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Okay. Noah is a good man who does what God tells him. That's the point of this story so far. God created humans and said, I've done a really good thing. And in such a short time, he said, I've done a really bad thing. I'm sorry I ever did this. I'm getting rid of all of these. But there is one man who does what he's told. Who does what he's told. I told you Steven Spielberg was asked once in an interview, if there is a heaven, Stephen, when you get there, what do you hope to hear? And he said, Stephen, thank you for remembering. He's a Jew. For remembering what you were taught and doing it. Remember what you were taught in this community of faith, and then do it. Okay, let me go just a little bit farther here because I want you to see one thing. Verse 2 of the next chapter. Let's start with verse 1. Be fine. Then the Lord said to Noah. We flip back to J. You see? We had J describing what was wrong with the world, then E describing what was wrong with the world. Now we're back to J. J's more primitive. So J tends to be a little more superstitious. What number represents wholeness and fullness? 7. So J says, God said, take 7. Look, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I've seen that you alone, Noah, are righteous before me in this generation. You're the only good man I know. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals. Did you hear me? Okay. So, one source says 2, one says 7. So folks that say 7, not only 7, but 14. People that talk about the inerrancy of Scripture, you see, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're dishonest. Take your pick. This is a marvelous book, the most important we have in the world. Teaches us about God, but often in the hearts, from the hearts and minds of very primitive people. Last week in the sermon, I told you about a man who had died in Paris, who had grown up in a Jewish family in Belgium, who, with his family, had to escape the oncoming Nazis, ended up being called by many in the world. I read his obituary in the Wall Street Journal. It was in Time. It was in Newsweek. It was in the Tulsa World, too. Called the father of modern anthropology. Father of modern anthropology. Strauss. Spelled exactly like my old professors. 2 S's on the end. Strauss. Okay. He said, he lived to be over 100, that he'd spent his lifetime studying these ancient stories of all ancient peoples. We have great libraries now. You can get this knowledge from all of them in one place. You can accumulate. He'd studied these ancient stories, and he said, even though they are written by primitive people, they have amazingly profound truths contained in them. I mean, think about the Greek myths. Think about the Roman myths. They've endured all these centuries because they're stories about envy and jealousy and incest and murder and all sorts of things. And what they say about the way people act has so much truth in it. We still fly too close to the sun that melts our wings and we crash and so on. We still spend our lifetimes pushing a ball up a hill and then it rolls over us back down again and we push again. You and I belong to this faith community because we believe the Jews saw even more into the heart of God than any others. If we believe the Hittites got it, that's where we ought to be. If we think the Moabites got it, the Edomites got it, that's where we should be. If we think the ancient Babylonians got it, then we should be worshiping Marduk today. We are Christian because we believe the Jews got it better than anybody else. And that faith community God would use to send to us Gentiles His Son Jesus. Because that faith community had gotten it better than anybody else. Okay. Doesn't mean we can't learn from others. We can learn from others. We can hear their stories. We can read their stories. And we can learn. But we think the ones that were nearer a right understanding of God than any other, the Jews, the Israelites. And therefore, our faith tradition is born out of that one. Okay? All right, let's go a little farther. Look with me at verse 24 of chapter 7. I'm just skipping here. We're just hitting highlights, not doing it the way we did last time. And the waters swelled on the earth for 150 days. Now, if you read the whole story, it will tell you that not only did water fall from the heavens, it also came up from the abyss. Remember, Bible writers, ancient storytellers of the Jews, believed water was everywhere, all around, north, south, east, and west, up and down. And so when God really wants to flood the place, He not only brings water from up above the canopy or the inverted bowl, He also brings it up from the bottom, from the abyss where there's great water. Remember, they thought the earth was sort of built like Venice, pillars driven down into the mucky muck down below. So 40 days and nights it pours down rain, but the waters continue to swell and cover the earth for 150 days. Chapter 8. But God, who? Elohim. The second source, put down in writing about 50 years or so, we think, after J. Okay, so here's the E writer, the one who says visions and dreams and so on. God, remembered Noah. Remembered Noah. That's a really important word. As we go through the Hebrew Scriptures, hitting these biggest high points, we'll find that's a key word. When we get to the Moses stories, God remembered His people Israel. Just after we've read, there came to power a Pharaoh who knoweth not Joseph. Who didn't know him, didn't remember him, didn't want to know him. Just one remembers. When we get to Sarah's jealousy, chasing Hagar and her baby out into the desert, does Sarah repent and go looking for them? Abraham, who fathered this child, go looking for them? Who shows up? God. We'll get to that later. The Jews' stories are profound. But what are they trying to tell us? Again, if you don't try to make them be perfect knowledge about astronomy and geography and geology and all those sorts of things, if you let them be what they are theology. This is a book of theology. That is, knowledge about God. The scholars we brought to Barton Clinton Gordy have said this to you and me over and over. What is God doing on this page? One of the first ones that I encouraged our committee to invite after I came here, he was about the third or fourth one, as I recall, Dr. Bill Power, was one of my favorites. He was the one who made the Torah live for me in seminary. An Anglican from Canada, his background, but taught all of his adult lifetime at Perkins School of Theology, SMU, after he got his doctoral degree and so on. Tremendous. And he would always, when people would get hung up on, some point of geology, astronomy, whatever, no, wait, this book is not about that. This book is about God. So what is it telling you? Boy, it's poured down rain and the waters have come up and the little boat's floating for 150 days. And God remembered Noah. And all that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow. What's the word for wind? Ruach. It's the same as breath. The very thing God had done in creating humans And remember, in the more recent story, Genesis 1, there's nothing about a woman coming from the rib of man or anything. It's just God created them, males and females. God created them males and females and breathed into them His own breath. And so now when God is going to start again, He decided, I'll just wash everybody away. Now He remembers Noah and all who were with him, and He goes, the breath of God. Same word, means wind, breath, spirit. This is the word here. He made a great ruach blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Guess what? When Moses leads the children of Israel right up to the sea, and they look around and Pharaoh's right behind them, God caused a great ruach to separate the waters. These words, see, if you cannot read nor write, you sit around a campfire at night and you hear these great stories and you hear these same words. The word for ark, and then you don't hear it till somebody one night tells a story about Moses in this little basket on the Nile River. Or you hear about ruach being breathed into Adam and Eve. And now the wind drives back the waters. The water subsided. The fountains, fountains are not overhead, fountains are underneath, remember? So water's falling, water's also coming up from underneath. And the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens are closed. Water stops rising, water stops falling. Verse 14. We're skipping around, remember? In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Then El, not Eye Asher Eye, not I am who I am, but El said to Noah, go out of the ark. Same word. You see it's used over and over and over. But after the Noah stories, never again till Moses. You and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives with you, bring out with you every living thing that's with you of all flesh, birds and animals, every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, so that they may abound on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, and every animal, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out of the ark by fountains. I was trying to do this many years ago, teach very similarly to the way I am now. And a wife of one of the Houston Oilers football players when I was in Houston. And I was trying to tell them, that this is a story told by very primitive people to explain something that was in their memory. A great flood. Once there was a great flood. And so we have a boat. And then I simply said, but you have to, let me explain how you can know this is a book about theology and not about other things. Think how big the Houston Zoo is, I said. Think how big our zoo is here in Houston. And we have just the smallest part of animal life that roams the planet. So it's not really talking about a boat that could hold every animal on the planet. And she said, but it was a big boat, wasn't it? Yeah, it was a big boat, 450 feet long, maybe. But it's told by a people who have a memory of a great flood. It's been talked about around campfires for hundreds of years. So how did people survive? And 17 other tribes had their take on this story, and the Jews had their take on this story. And the key is the punchline. What's the punchline to the story? What was the conclusion that everybody else came to, and what was the conclusion that the Israelites, forerunners of Hebrews, Jews, what did they decide? Okay, let's go a little farther. Verse 21. Well, let's start with 20. Noah built an altar to the Lord. Okay, notice we've shifted to J from E. Okay, we've been talking about Elohim, Elohim, Elohim. Oh, I am who I am. Noah built an altar to the I am who I am. Remember that a part of the burnt offering was made great smells. Barbecue. It's like barbecue. You walk through your neighborhood and somebody's cooking steaks in their backyard. Somebody's grilling a chicken in their backyard. Somebody's cooking salmon for dinner tonight. You can smell it. It smells good. Well, ancient folks knew when you put something on the fire and roast it, it smells good. Even God would recognize a good smell. So God smells this being offered up to Him, and He liked it. The I am who I am smelled the pleasing odor, but Yahweh, or the I am who I am, still said in His heart, I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth. In other words, God is saying, I realize all this water has not really changed people. So I'm going to change. This is the Jews' story. So I'm going to change. Go to verse 8, chapter 9. We're back to E. El said to Noah and to his sons with him, As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that's with you, birds, domestic animals, every animal of the earth, as many as came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again. Any confusion about what the word never means? Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you. Not just Jews. Every living creature for all future generations. I've set my bow in the clouds. Now, a bow was a weapon of war. A weapon of war. I'm not going to war with you anymore. I'm going to put my bow, this beautiful red, green, yellow, blue bow, in the sky. And He doesn't say, I expect you to remember. God says, I will remember. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant. I'll cut off the water. Verse 16, the everlasting covenant. How long? Everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. The rainbow to remind God. Okay, let me tell you the punchline. I told you last Sunday in the sermon. 17 other stories about the Great Flood from tribal groups that lived in the Middle East. Hittites, Moabites, Perizzites, Edomites, etc. In 17 stories told around different tribal campfires, the punchline is the one who built the boat and saved humankind got to be God. The Jews' story, the boat settled. Noah got off and offered a sacrifice to God. planted some grapes, made wine, got drunk, embarrassed himself in front of his kids, and then he died. So what is the Jews' story trying to say? We're just going to have one God, and it's not you, and it's not me. It is not I. I'm not it. You're not it. No one else is it. Nobody's king, nobody's queen, nobody's Caesar. Is going to be God. And even when you do what's right, you're going to die. I hope you will do what's right, because it makes the world a lot better place. But even when you do what's right, you're going to die. And everything after that is going to depend upon the one who put the rainbow in the sky. It's all going to depend on God. They're just one of them. Just one. Do you see? This is a great book. It's a great book. But it's a book about theology. It's a book about God. What is God doing here? What is God doing here? And look, the great truth of today. There is much evil in the earth. Anybody deny that? Big people, rich people, strong people push around little people. Poor people, old people, young people, handicapped people. Push them around. Treat them badly. Kill them sometimes. Bad, bad, bad. But God has chosen, and later we'll come to other passages and say, God has chosen to pitch His tent with humans. And He said, I'm never going to destroy them all again. Never. I'm going to put a rainbow in the sky. My bow, I'm putting in the sky. Not warring against people. You can teach them, hope they obey. But every time I see my bow, I'm going to remember my covenant. And let me tell you that in my experience with Jews and Christians, they talk often, the Jews do, about the Noahide covenant. Noahide covenant. They're talking about this passage right here. And what they understand that to be is that later He's going to get very specific with Abraham and Sarah. Their people. Abraham and Sarah, my people, the Jews say. But before my people, the Jews had an understanding that everybody is finally God's people. All are finally God's people. And God put a bow in the sky to remember all the people. He will give the Jews a very special place and help them with their stories that He hopes everybody in the world will come to believe are true about Him. Stories that are true about the nature, heart, and mind of God. But He loves us all, even non-Jews, according to the Noahide covenant that the Jews talk about. All right. Well, we made a good many chapters today. We'll pick up next week. We're going to jump to Jewish history with Abram and Sarah next Sunday morning. If you haven't been to church, don't rush off.